Tactics and Practice Podcast.
Dobar dan, everyone, and welcome to the Tactics and Practice Podcast, the audio extension of the Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art's discursive program of the same name, focusing on investigative art, society, and new technologies. Each year, Tactics and Practice focuses on a specific theme. The 14th edition, held in Ljubljana in the spring of 2023, was dedicated to scale. I'm Neja Berger, and I followed the entire program, interviewing some of its protagonists for this channel's first mini-series of 4 episodes. The first episode, where we talked about nanoscale, cognition, and material intelligence with independent writer and researcher Laura Tripaldi, came out last week. And if you missed it, you can easily find it wherever you're listening to this one. I'm delighted to introduce the guests of the second episode, Cuban artist Nestor Siré and German anthropologist / filmmaker Steffen Köhn. So you two have been collaborating in ethnographic artistic projects which focused on alternative information distributions in places somewhat disconnected from the World Wide Web, let's say. Your work is based on research that you did on alternative networks in Cuba. And if we're talking in terms of scale, if the World Wide Web presents this ginormous infrastructure that we know today, alternative networks you've researched are kind of mini community-ran networks with a completely different logic and much more decentralized. But before we get into that, maybe you can tell me a bit more about your background and how you two met, actually, and started collaborating. I want to know that story.
As an anthropologist, I'm very interested in the social repercussions of digital technology, and I think I got fascinated or interested about Cuba when I heard in 2015, like kind of the first public Wi-Fi hotspots were opening, and a lot of Cubans had their first experience with the internet. And I also learned a bit about like kind of all these alternative data distribution networks that Cubans have come up with to like kind of counter the scarcity of internet. When I ran into Nestor in early 2020, after I've already worked with the first generation of YouTubers in Havana, I think we immediately clicked because Nestor's artistic practice is actually very much related also to my perspective from anthropology. Nestor as an artist works very much in an interventionist way. He's interested in like kind of social contexts. He collaborates with communities, also in the way that the people he works with really have a stake in the work. In anthropology, there's a strong ethical idea of collaboration and sharing the production of knowledge. And I think this is exactly what Nestor also does as an artist. Yeah, since we met, we immediately became friends. And since then, we have a very productive collaboration.
For me, it was like very interesting to know Steffen because, it's a lot of people coming to Cuba and researching about this reality, this phenomenon. But I always I feel like some of these people are coming to Cuba for research about this phenomenon. They spend 2 days in Havana and 2 weeks in Varadero, and it's always weird in a way, open or try to, make interviews. But Steffen from the beginning was completely different. Also for me, it's super important that if you are coming to a country and try to research about this country, at least you must to have a minimal knowledge about this reality and be able to communicate with people, because at the end, how you do it, the process of research. In relation with Steffen, his Spanish from the beginning was incredible, and after we'll start to talking more, and understand more of what he want to do it, and also his understanding about art was just a super easy thinking about to do it something together.
Yeah, well, it's very obvious from this that you're really a dynamic duo. Like I said at the beginning, you're working really well together and doing this art that's also research, and it's completely intertwined and really intersectional. And that's why I think your projects are so good. And if we start maybe with Memoria first, we're talking about art, but also the way that people can maybe consume art and digital media. This project of yours was really... first of all, it was better than the Hollywood version. I just have to say that for the record, it's way better. So yeah, it's a cyberpunk film / immersive video installation about someone carrying information on a hard drive in their brain and losing their memory. But here on the podcast, maybe we'd focus more on how this content connects to the reality of the Paquete Semanal distribution network in Cuba. Maybe we focus on that.
Yeah, I think Memoria is probably the most fictional work we've done so far. The main documentary context that this work is playing with is El Paquete Semanal, which is Cuba's offline internet. Data packages in Cuba are still extremely expensive, even though people have like even mobile internet since a couple of years. So nobody actually really streams films on the internet, or streams music. That's why you have an underground network of people who have privileged internet access because they work in tourist hotels or at state institutions, who spend their nights like downloading everything that's new on the internet. All the new like Brazilian, Turkish, Korean telenovelas, HBO series, Netflix films. There's people really dedicated to just one genre, and then they have their computers running all night to get this stuff together. And then there's like kind of compilation houses in Havana who bring all this data together in like kind of a curated 1 terabyte data collection that is released every week and is transported by a network of so-called paqueteros, data distributors who really come to your home with the hard drive, leave it for 24 hours with you. You pay $2, copy whatever you want, and then they bring it to the next person. And now Johnny Mnemonic, this short story from William Gibson from the 1980s, deals exactly with an offline data courier, like a guy who lives in this dystopian cyberpunk future, has a hard drive implanted in his head and physically transports data that his clients deem too sensitive to put into the internet because it's like pirated software or stolen data. And both phenomena, like kind of El Paquete and these like kind of early cyberpunk fiction, for us kind of also represents alternatives to the internet as we know it now, as this like algorithmically determined, walled garden, closed capitalist internet. In Cuba, we have this decentralized offline internet, bottom up, made by the people, and like kind of in cyberpunk literature, we have a 1980s, 1990s vision of the internet as completely anarchist piracy place, and all these like cyberpunk short stories from the 80s, William Gibson's writing, Neil Stephenson's writing, have influenced so much how we think about the internet. Terms like avatar, metaverse, the cyberspace, this all comes from this literature. And also we thought it's actually interesting to like kind of contrast these two phenomena, these two genres. That was a bit what we wanted to play with. And also Cuba has its own history with cyberpunk. Maybe you can talk about this a bit.
The Cuban reality is very cyberpunk. Like, we'll make all the process of filming this history in Cuba, in Havana. We're working with the production of this material was very close to the idea of make a production of a short independent film. We'll create a lot of collaboration for make this happen. And specifically one of the most interesting collaboration was with Copincha. That is the first hacker space in Havana that actually have like a very, we can say, solar boom philosophy of understand the Cuban reality and the use of technology. They are very focused in this idea of try to understand how technology can make better Cuba and try to archiving the creativity of Cuban reality.
And recycling and sustainability
sustainability.
Big topics for them.
Yeah, like right now they are working a lot with this idea of recycled plastic and how in the installation we can see this like a central offline server. This server have a computer that is like a DIY completely with a chassis that is made using like a recycled plastic for make filament.
But actually the most important collaboration we entered into is that we asked a Cuban cyberpunk science fiction writer to write the screenplay adaptation of the short story. And cyberpunk as a literary genre also has its own history in Cuba, because there is actually quite a vital movement of cyberpunk science fiction writers. And the genre also arrived like just in the 90s to Cuba, also through these alternative data distribution networks. And like Cuban writers used apocalyptic cyberpunk ideas also to make sense of their own reality. In the 1990s, Cuba was suffering this immense economic crisis after the fall of the special period, as Fidel called it very euphemistically. Yeah, that was basically when like the Soviet camp fell, no, the socialist camp, and Cuba from one day to the other, they were all on their own without any subsidies, without any imports, imported energy, imported goods. And Cuban cyberpunk literature very much reflects this time through the lens of these apocalyptic landscapes that the genre describes.
This is why the Johnny Mnemonic story works so much better in a Cuban context, I think, than the Keanu Reeves version, which is, it's science fiction for them maybe, but in this Cuban context in which you created this story/installation film immersive experience, it really works because it's a parallel to how media is really distributed by paqueteros going around maybe with hard drives, not in their brain, but in their bag. But, it really works so much better. So just for people who maybe can't imagine exactly how it works, do you have your own contact, someone that brings you the hard drive to your home? How exactly is it distributed? And the people who bring you this content do, instead of the algorithm, they kind of recommend something for you maybe?
Yeah. The process is very natural in a way. Nobody create the weekly packet as a phenomenon. The weekly packet is more like the result of years and years of very peculiar situation.
It emerged.
Yeah, we can say from economic and political situation, the disconnection of a full country.
It was just a logical consequence. That
it's like the weather. They coming in a very natural way. And also to understand more the weekly packet, we'll need to coming back 30 years in the history of Cuba when the distribution of entertainment material was focused more in books. The previous idea, the previous net of the weekly packet is coming from people renting underground books. After, with the democratization of the technology, these spaces changed from books to videotapes, and from videotapes to CDs and DVDs. And after with the computers and hard drive and USB, the logic and the idea was almost the same. People getting connections between cities. And when the democratization of the technology happened in Cuba and the government changed rules and allow citizens to have computers and this type of technology, was just logic. The process or the phenomenon will adapt very fast to that.
And piracy is okay, right? It's not, that's copyright is...
So that's also quite an interesting question, the question of piracy, no? Because of the US embargo, Cuba also as a state is literally not able to pay royalties, for example.
I feel like it's completely
Hollywood.
Fair that, as a response, they would be like, well, copyright, fuck that, let's...
So even films that you see on state TV are pirated, no? School books are reprinted without license.
Yeah.
But you asked a bit how the daily experience of El Paquete Semanales, and what I wanted to add to that is data transfer is a very face-to-face affair in Cuba. People always carry USB sticks around with them. You have data copy stores everywhere in
Any
each
corner.
Because the Apple App Store and the Google Play Store don't work. You also have to physically install your mobile phone apps. No, so you also need someone who has centrally downloaded them somewhere for you, and then you go there with your USB cable. So it's a very personal affair, and these paqueteros also work a lot like Netflix recommendation algorithms, actually, in the sense that they really start knowing their audience. No, and I mean a 1 terabyte hard drive is also an immense. It's a lot, no, and a lot of people also don't own computers. For example, older clients, they may just have a USB stick that they directly plug into their TV. So very often there's paqueteros who know their audience and prepare something already for them. No, Albany, one of the guys who's playing one of the data pirates in our film, is a hip hop musician, but he used to work as a paquetero. And when I interviewed him, he explained for me that he always had a lot of older clients with who he really had to kind of sit down and kind of go through what could be interesting for them. I think part of kind of the payment is also kind of the time that people actually take to understand what their clients like. So it's a very intimate connection. You also have a very intimate relationship with your paquetero.
No, do you with the time do you develop a very close relationship? I have one. I don't have a paquetero to my home, a delivery service, because I prefer to go to these spaces that are more public, also help me to keep in understanding if something is changing in this reality. It's a way to research for me. But I have like a one point in Havana that is actually not close to my home anymore, but I just moved and I am keeping going to the same place. I have like a one paquetera, and she know everything about me in relation with my anime and manga, test. I can sit down and asking like, hey, what is new? And everything she say to me, everything she copy, I am super happy with this. This type of relation is very close, and also is making like very easy. Imagine if you be able to have like one service that include everything right now: Netflix, Hulu, HBO, all together.
I love that, yeah, and it's much more accessible. Like it's cheap, right? It's affordable for anyone, and people can pitch in together to have one service, right? And then they just copy it from each other because that's the point. Like it's a pirate kind of based thing. That's great. And yeah, it does sound like the recommendation systems, but they just recommend things for you to enjoy, but they don't harvest your data maybe. They don't extract anything from you to sell to advertisers, let's say. So I really love the way this system works. Before we started recording, we kind of started talking about whether podcasts are a thing in Cuba, which I found out they're not exactly a thing. But this is also something that I wanted to mention here. The difference between the, let's say, streamification of how we consume media in more connected places, let's say, as opposed to this kind of weekly delivery service, where if you stream something that everyone just does their own individual streaming experience and falls into their own loopholes of the algorithm. Whereas if it's a packet, then, I mean, 1 tera is huge, but for communities of friends, let's say, I would imagine they all want to watch maybe the same show. And then they see, so did you see the thing in this week's package? Like it's more of a common experience, maybe?
Yeah, we can say because of the weekly packet, we are following sometimes like the same famous thing that is happening in the world. In Cuba was crazy Game of Thrones and all these Marvel movies.
But you would also, for example, find the full Oscar ceremony the day after it was streamed on American television.
And
it's super fast, right?
Football game.
Sport is coming one day after. Like at the beginning, the weekly packet was with this idea of like a one packet per week, but now for these sell points in the street, they are receiving data every day. This means that if something happened one day, the next day do you already have it? And in relation with TV shows and series, like it's super fast. With Mandalorian right now, like I always see Mandalorian like the next day or sometimes the same day. Nice. Because like the weekly packet is changing every day, now with the internet, sometimes with this small episode that are not like a super heavy, you can download from FTPs or things like that are online just inside Cuba. When I am traveling, I don't have access to this like a server, and it's like a people from SNet or like some universities that just share the full weekly packet, and because this is more fast, I can maybe attend like 2 hours after the show coming on Netflix or whatever. I can just have it at my home, and maybe we can say this is the only materials that I actually download with using like a internet connection, but it's coming from the weekly packet, because at the end this is the phenomenon that actually create the selection of this material. Before internet, like even we'll have a lot of YouTubers, like right now we are having YouTubers, but people are watching more small clips in YouTube because are not like a super expensive, you can just watch that. Or even like advertising was like a very big thing in the weekly packet.
Yeah, so Cubans actually have also at some point started to like distribute their own stuff, like using it as a local infrastructure. So you have the first YouTubers in Cuba, like put their videos in this package for like kind of a small fee. There's Pentecostal churches who use it for distributing their religious content.
Musicians, that the music industry in Cuba prefer to have a premiere in the weekly packet and not in national television because it's just more fast and more popular. This is another question that sometimes we'll have, like, hey, what is happening with the weekly packet or this type of phenomenon now with the internet? And definitely it's not disappearing, it's not getting like a less attention, it's like a more strong than ever, and just like it's just changing, with these new realities.
So you mentioned SNet a couple of times, I think. So maybe this is the time to explain to our listeners what that is, and to maybe shift from this really cool phenomenon of paquete semanal to another information distribution network infrastructure that you two also researched together. So it's kind of community-led network that also emerged quite organically because like gamers wanted to play together and multiplayer games, basically, as far as I understand it. So it emerged in Havana and then it evolved to something new. Maybe if you tell us more about the history of SNet, what it is, how it works.
Yeah, so SNet is a massive grassroots computer network that is completely disconnected from the internet, and that connects like tens of thousands of households in Havana, and it basically functions, like an intranet that covers the whole city, no? So people have laid like kilometers of Ethernet cables across streets. They have put Wi-Fi antennas on their rooftops to like kind of create this like super decentralized mesh network, no? And it, as you said, it grew super organically, mainly out of the gamer community. I think LAN parties were very popular at the end of 2000s, early 2010s. And then people just had this idea, hey, why don't we, instead of like always bringing all of our computers to one place, why don't we lay this cable to like kind of your house there over the street? And then it just grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And while it grew, people also created an internal structure, like kind of a hierarchy, logics and a system how to maintain it. Obviously, all these materials that it's made of are very hard to get in Cuba. For a long time, it was also illegal to bring Wi-Fi antennas into the country. So all of this material is quite expensive. But then if you put a Wi-Fi antenna that is made for indoor use outside, it's also obviously going to suffer from the tropical weather. No, so people decided to have a monthly repair fee that could be used to maintain the network. And then you all of a sudden you had a very complex social infrastructure or human infrastructure behind the technological infrastructure that sustains this network.
Yeah, SNet is huge. Like at some point was like one of the biggest in the world. I think in Cuba because the disconnection, SNet is like a pre-internet phenomenon that was like actually more close to this idea of how internet worked and was massive. All the young people or not so young that live in Havana and have some kind of connection with this idea of like a gamers culture was part of SNet. And Havana is like a very big city with 2 million of people. Well, for Cuba, it's a big city. And this was massive. And inside this community, the things that they create was just incredible. They are using like a piece of software that the name is TimeSpeak as a central of communications. And also TimeSpeak create a space for people that create like a version of podcasts, like radio, DJs.
Yeah, so TeamSpeak is basically like kind of a voice over IP software that is used for online gaming, no? So people who, if you ever played World of Warcraft or something, you're probably familiar with TeamSpeak, no? Because it's like a Skype for online gamers. But Cubans have really, or SNet people have really adapted it for their own needs, using the audio channels to do radio shows, using the chat for like network-wide communication.
For young people will be like a version of Discord today. Like Discord happened and TimeSpeak just get old and nobody remember TimeSpeak now, but because actually create a server of TimeSpeak is better for the slow connection. TimeSpeak come to stay inside the SNet communities. And also like it's very interesting because how do you auto-represent yourself in TimeSpeak? They create a lot of structure to build identities in this net using these specific conditions.
So to use it a bit like a social network, you could say, also for self-representation with like little logos.
Stickers and logos and so many things inside SNet. It's so huge how they create his own like a social dynamic. Most of the structure of the net was created because people give a lot of like, small portions of money. At the beginning was like a chaotic and natural way. It's just like how in Cuba will make things better in the neighborhood. Like when I was a teenager, if you want to play football or something like that, you need to buy a ball. And at the end, everybody just put like whatever they can give. It's a kind of like a social way to, have enough money for buy one ball and everybody using.
And it was very communal in that sense, right? Yeah. Everybody pitched in to buy an antenna, and the person that lived highest up, like right in the apartment.
Is the admin of the server.
Is the admin, because they could put the antenna like on their balcony. It was high enough to transmit data, and then this whole communal kind of network grew.
Even though we also have to say that there is a lot of internal debates of people like really using it to make money. No,
yeah, now it's very different. Yeah,
and also El Paquete. No, I mean, at the end of the day, it's run like a business. So that's actually also something we are very interested in within these communities, in all these moral or ethical discussions, you could say. No, because like Cubans, I think still, even though maybe many of them don't really believe in the political system anymore, they all grew up with these socialist ideas. But then Raúl Castro from 2011 started to give more space to the private sector and introduce more and more like kind of capitalist elements. So, and I think in these communities, you can actually really see how people kind of bottom up negotiate these different value systems, between like having these socialist ideas, but living in a more and more capitalist world.
Yeah, no, and in a way, like how we'll present SNET in our like show is also like a way to understand Cuba as a country. I think like what happened exactly in SNET is a interesting social experimentation about what can happen with Cuba. At the end, the big problems of SNET was what happened in we can say like a primitive society, like the excellent. They start to make more money, like the at some point they just buy like a very good technology, and they start to receiving money from the community. And this money was focused on just spend, in the structure.
Maintenance.
But after that, like, was a salary.
At some point, it became profitable for people to be admin servers. So they weren't maybe anymore because they wanted to be part of that, but also because it was profitable for them.
Actually, this was like a so big problem that at some point the community divide in half because of the money. It was a big issue also like inside this community. And right now, like, it's like so many things happen with SNET. Like after this intern war, we can say, the government attack, and they take the best moment with the community divide and just getting in and change the rules about like communications, that the limit of connection,
the radio transmitter Wi-Fi power. So basically from one day to the next, it was basically illegal to have like kind of a Wi-Fi transmitting device with like kind of specific power, and that basically meant that SNET as it was basically from one day to the next illegal.
So at some point, right, SNET was merged with the public infrastructure.
Exactly, that happened in 2019. So the Cuban state basically runs like kind of its own intranet that connects the youth computer clubs, the Joven Clubs de Computación. That's like kind of community computer centers where young people can have computer courses, but where they can also come to play. And now there was a bit of negotiation going on. The SNET administrators
and demonstrations also
tried to fight the complete ban of the network. There was even like some demonstrations going on online and offline. The agreement that was found was that all admins have to get a license, register their materials, and connect directly to the next local.
So that was the compromise, kind of. We're not banning it, but it has to be merged to the public infrastructure.
It lost it's an anonymity, because now you have to log in with like some login credentials and a password. So it's not anonymous anymore, and it's not really decentralized anymore. So at least officially.
Yeah, it was always like that. Even before, you must to log in.
But the state didn't have access.
But exactly. In a way, like a part of the SNET, like Pilares and Nodos, like are still like fighting today, for like have more like independent or something like that. But
because at the end of the day, it's also super difficult to control for the state.
If there is
still some neighborhood network, like kind of not officially connected.
But it's like SNET is not the same anymore. Like we can say in a way that like this philosophy of like a big net that complete independent autonomous just disappear,
And in your exhibition, Fragile Connections, we could see some interviews featured with these admins, SNET server admins. And it was, at least as far as I could tell, they were quite disappointed with this nationalization, let's say, or with the fact that their network merged with the public infrastructure, even though, as you mentioned in your talk, a lot of gamers and users of the SNet were happy because the connections were faster. They could play with Santiago maybe or something. It wasn't just local to Habana anymore. But the admins were very nostalgic for the times where it was really their own thing. So it was not something that they just cooperated in. It's really something that they built up from the ground, and they really all helped each other. I remember several of them said, yeah, but in the old days, everything was shittier. Of course, the connections were slower. We had a bunch of problems. But when my antenna got stolen, everyone from the community like pitched in a little bit and we replaced it. And so it was really our thing, even.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think there's different factions now. You had a very idealistic faction now. The guy who you just mentioned, Kopek, who said that he was also part of the NetLab Programmers Forum, where people really like kind of exchanged a lot of like kind of knowledge. So he was very much taken by this idea of like community. But then there was obviously also administrators who ran more as a business, no? And I mean, this illegalization also for people who really owned a lot of antennas and had invested like a lot of like big sums in that infrastructure. Of course, they prefer to like have some kind of legal status so that the state cannot just take it away from them, no? So I think there's like just different factions.
Yeah.
For a lot of gamers, it's just about like being able to play, no? But of course, ideals of autonomy like also resonated with a lot of people. So
and also like after
it means different things for different people, I would say.
Yeah, after this like connection with the government prohibit that anybody pay in the community, like they prohibit a fee. And this was also like, an older problem for admins that at this point, this was like his job, and they from one day to the another just lost this incoming money from the community. Because now...
So then it was financed from the government and free for everyone to use after that.
The government didn't put any money in.
Well, all the servers from the whole clue are very expensive. This is the way to spend. And the cables like fiber optic fiber, like all these structures, like computer of the whole clue that the people can use. But this was like a money already, spending from years before was already there in a way. This is more or less what is happening in our project. We'll specifically try to debate about that. Like also what is the moral and ethic position to understand or have a position about what this type of community must to do it, for example, in a country like Cuba.
So as you said yesterday also in your artist talk, it's not, as far as we maybe tend to romanticize it from this Western perspective, alternative networks, that must be like some kind of anarchist rebellion, political organization. But as you said, it was really more community-based networks because of necessity, because there was no way to connect, and it was mostly a gamer community, right? As far as I understand.
And what I also find interesting, talking about this like topic of scale, I think it's also quite fascinating that El Paquete, but also to an extent SNet, particularly in its heydays, were not like so much some kind of alternative underground network, but very mainstream, or particularly El Paquete, very mainstream, is because it really has this like kind of nationwide... It doesn't make too much sense to like kind of approach it from this idea of alternative to something, but El Paquete is actually the mainstream way of...
It wasn't an alternative to anything because there was no mainstream internet, right? That makes sense. And maybe
it is in a way an alternative to like kind of the state television, that a lot of Cubans, I think, find very boring because it's so pedagogical and ideological. So in that way, it is an alternative. But it's not an alternative to like
but very easy to win versus the national television.
So this is something that I definitely learned a lot about from your projects in the last few days, is that maybe I also approach it from this Eurocentric or Western perspective of like the idea of an alternative network, because here our entire society and democracy is so consumed by this privatized internet infrastructure that we're really an alternative network sounds something so revolutionary.
I mean, I think it's also not wrong, no? I think what is also the beauty of anthropology, as like David Graeber once said, it gives you this living archive of alternatives. We live in this world where we always feel there is no alternative to the capitalist system anymore, but actually anthropology really can show us that people at different times and at different places have organized their affairs quite differently, no? So I think that can actually also be like kind of the political purchase or the political impact of anthropology. But I think you also have to see the perspective of the local people. And I think in Cuba, you probably, I mean, all these SNet makers, they are super proud of what they do and what they've commonly achieved. But I think a lot of people would actually immediately exchange our seamless, cheap internet access to what they have built.
Yeah.
No? So.
Of course, as much as we love to criticize it here, me included, when one day without your Wi-Fi working and you lose your mind, it is a bit hypocritical of us for sure. But I did want to conclude on that note to kind of ask you, so it's very different from our romanticized maybe idea of an alternative network because it really arose from a necessity, but still we can probably learn a lot about how it works. And how maybe in the future, in 100 years, when climate change, fucks everything up for everyone, and maybe internet access won't be so taken for granted anymore. What can we learn from these alternative organizations, and how do they create community? How do they impact the culture?
I think in that sense, these like communities we're interested in are very much sci-fi, because they're already living, or a lot of Cubans are actually living in a reality of which I'm very sure we maybe gonna experience here in Europe as well in 30, 40 years, like kind of when climate change becomes worse, maybe our social systems collapse and we finally understand always producing more and like throwing technological devices away after 2 or 3 years because the new one comes and you're not able to repair them, that this is not sustainable. So all these practices of repair, of DIY, low-tech solutions that are at the core of the cyberpunk genre, I think that is something that maybe a lot of us, particularly like kind of the younger generations, probably in their lifetime are gonna achieve. So Cuba in that sense is not behind as a tourist who comes to Cuba to like kind of see these like kind of old 1950s cast things, but maybe an example or a vision of all our collective future, maybe.
This is a very interesting question. Definitely, we, are always try to say that it's very important to not romanticize. Of course, it's a lot of things that we can learn about this, alternative. I think like even when these alternatives are because we don't have like an internet or this connection, they are like a very interesting what we can learn from there. For example, with the weekly packet, we learn that first, like this, like a decentralized economy is working better than what we'll know about this, like a global, like a streaming service that are the same for, everybody in the world. Like, I love this idea of like how even the weekly packet change between cities. People have completely like a full power to adapt the structure of information and the material specifically in relation with what he think will be more important for this local audience. And also the decentralized economy for me is one of the very important points because I don't like this idea of super global companies that are making a lot of money and just taking money from small countries. And for example, SNet, in a way, outside Cuba, like everybody just have like a Wi-Fi antenna in his home and they are just using, but they don't have any idea how this works. If something happen, you must have like a person that come in and try to fix for you. Communities like SNet, they are building, like they are learning. They are not like a passive user, usuarios, they are active usuarios. They must learn like a basic about how this technology work. This technology is your technology. Like exactly. This antenna, this device is your device. You pay for that, and you can understand how they work, and you have like it's yours. Like you can. You go to a friend home and bring them and reuse in another spaces and this is not like something that happened with the internet anymore. I hope that something like that, also for the climate change and everything is like a better future in a way that you can just not just understand how they work, also fix it.
That's such a great point.
I always say, like, in Cuba, we have all these abilities, not because we want to protect the world, it's just because we don't have another option, but after you learning that and your father teach you how to fix your bike, you are doing even when you no need to do it. And I think this natural social process, like coming from like a necessity, but at the end is part of your cultural reality, is the future. If we want to do it this in a more stable way, if we want to be able to protect the world for real.
Thank you so much for that. And let's all hope we're maybe going towards a future where, we can all learn how to control and understand technology as opposed to technology controlling us. I think what you researched and presented today is definitely like a building block for how we can think about getting there. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for the invitation, and it was like a very interesting experience.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. Next week, I'll be joined by artists Anna Engelhardt and Mark Sienkiewicz to discuss the demonic nature of colonial infrastructure. So, hope to see you then. Scale is a podcast series hosted by myself, Neja Berger. It's curated by Janez Falkenjanscha, and it's produced by Marcela Ukretic for the Aksioma Institute for Contemporary Art. The series is part of the 14th edition of the Tactics and Practice Discursive Program, which was made possible by CON's Platform for Contemporary Investigative Art. For more information on the context, participants, and partners involved, see the links in the description. This episode was recorded and edited by yours truly and mixed by Stash Kramar. The music was created by the amazing Kasper Torkar. You're welcome to visit aksioma.org, where you'll find a wealth of free content. And if you like what we do, consider supporting us on Patreon or by making a donation, but no pressure. That's all for this episode. Greetings from Ljubljana and na svidenje.
Tactics and Practice Podcast.